responsibilities of the government is to maintain a secure and stable nation. To do so, the government must sometimes restrict or limit citizens' liberties. The framers struck this balance in the 5th and 14th Amendments, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Okay, but what is due process exactly? Courts have not given a simple definition of this term, even though it has been the basis of hundreds of court cases throughout U.S. history. To better understand due process, we can break it into two main categories: procedural and substantive due process. Procedural due process provides the conditions under which the government may take your life, liberty, or property. The Miranda rights, which are the constitutional rights read to a criminal suspect before questioning, are an example. Here, procedural due process regulates how the government acts. Before it deprives a person of his physical liberty, it must follow constitutionally required procedures. Substantive due process prevents the government from restricting certain liberties unless it has a very important reason to do so. Liberties, such as the freedom of speech, the right to practice a chosen faith, and the right to marry, are examples of those the court have deemed fundamental. Focusing more on the importance of the liberty than procedures, substantive due process prevents the government from restricting certain fundamental liberties, unless it has a very important reason to do so. If a law does not infringe on a fundamental liberty, then the government is generally able to legislate. But if a law involves a fundamental liberty, then governmental limits are permissible only if its interest is compelling. How these liberties are defined is subject to change. Obergefell versus Hodges, in which the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, is one example. Whereas, in the past, marriage had been legally understood as a union between a man and a woman. In 2015, however, the court ruled that the fundamental right to marry is not conditional on the sex of the two individuals seeking to be wed. In doing so, it held that the government's interest in limiting marriage to opposite-sex couples was not important enough to deprive same-sex couples of that fundamental liberty. While procedural due process violations can be avoided by the government adhering to constitutionally mandated requirements, substantive due process is much more subjective in evaluating the fundamental nature of liberties and the importance of particular government interests.